Well, we can go ahead and get started if anyone else joins in, they join in. Thanks for making the time. I thought we've had a couple discussions like in one-on-ones and a couple things, but I thought was getting us all together and just seeing if we're all running the same direction or if there's any questions is really what I'm hoping to get out of this. And then I realized that this basically is constituting, what GitLab defines as a working group. So I thought doing some level of formal introduction to what that is, what that means, and what we're trying to do and what we're not going to do would be a good thing, mostly because we're going to start doing some handbook merge requests. They're going to be at Sid's level, and I'd like him to be able to see what we're working on and why. That's above and beyond the scope of just what engineering infrastructure is doing, IT ops is involved with. Why I'm touching it, that sort of stuff. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to do that. I threw some stuff in the doc of what I think we are doing. That is there for red penning, not for me to read off. If you'd like to pick at that or make any changes, now would be a good opportunity for us to just openly discuss that. We can look at the how in a few minutes, but let's get the what out of the way. So let me just open it before I go any further. If there's any objections to that thought process of the what we're solving, what we're not type of discussion, or if there's other areas that you want to focus on, Paul, I think you might have an opinion as well.
Yeah, I glued them into my topic in the agenda already, really just cutting back on after our discussion and a few other things. So no, I'm good.
Dave, anything you want to chime in before we dive into the weeds?
Not too well, just from past experience with working groups. I think the only other thing is like there's MRs, but you'll want to make sure we have the right executive sponsorship or whatever. Yeah, I assume you already know about some of that, but yeah, making sure you're aware of the pitfalls there. But I'm willing to help find that if needed.
Yeah, right now Brian Wise is the interim on the executive sponsorship because it's multiple groups. Because I do want to make sure that basically we have consensus among Brian, among Brent, among Steve, and then kind of go from there as a starting point. So
yeah, I think other than that, the main thing is I don't want that to be too much of a blocking thing. So yeah, no, I like a lot of what you got here, and keep the group moving, and we can sort out some of that stuff if needed.
Yeah, sounds good. Davis, I'm just going around the video site of who I see in the video of just open opinions.
Yeah, I was just reading through it. I don't think I have anything right now. Yeah, I just need to read through it more and see what's going on. Yeah, nothing so far.
Amber, any opening thoughts? I know that we haven't talked too much in detail on some of this because most of your involvement is going to be more in the operation once things go live. So a lot of the architecture we've been helping offload to keep it off your plate, you being as busy as you are. But anything that you'd like to get out of this or other opening thoughts?
I don't think I have any opening thoughts, no, but yeah, definitely excited to to see what comes of this and get some, I guess, some standardization in our infrastructure, at least on the ops side, so I can start helping out a little more.
Cool. I did also invite Daniel Parker, who is the new integrations engineer on the IT side, to kind of be a fly in the wall. He just joined the company a couple of weeks ago, and Brian suggested introducing him in. I did have a conversation with him a couple days ago and was very impressed. And he's got a pretty strong AWS background as well, so it might help us just offset because we don't have enough. We don't have, Amber, I think you would agree, we don't have enough resources in the IT side to do a full-on infrastructure role right now, and so kind of everyone's going to do it a hybrid. But I think he'd offer a lot of good perspective and possibly day-to-day support as well if needed.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Daniel told me before he has a lot of AWS experience, so if we could leverage him at all too, at least on the ops side, that would be great.
Awesome, very cool. Well, let's jump into kind of the highlights. I don't think any of this is new, but if there's something that we want to remove is mostly what I'm looking for. So nothing gets published in the handbook that we don't want to be there is my ultimate goal. Basically, where do people provision stuff at? Making sure that we have all of our accounts and stuff in the right places, right security policies set up at a high level, and then what people do inside of that, leave it to their discretion. I don't want to be the resource police. I don't think any of us want to be. I do think that we want to make it easy on security ops, so when something does happen, all the scaffolding is in place and to support the efficiency of dealing with whatever that is, and then setting best practices that our community at large can follow for, service accounts not being enabled, those kind of things that, those kind of, the top 10 are a version of an OWASP, if you will. Are there any objections to that piece of it?
Good to me.
Okay. Paul and I had an interesting conversation, a very good conversation. We had some interesting questions earlier this week, and it was basically Jeff, do you want to be an SRE, full-time type of thing, right? Because what we're looking at here is basically forming some form of new SRE style of management around this. What that becomes, let's not try to figure that out right now. Let's just try to figure out what the scaffolding looks like, and then we'll figure out the details after that. But there was a thing of, if something happens, what do we do? And Paul, can you reiterate your walled garden, sandbox, sandcastle analogy that you shared with me? I thought it was perfect for putting this out.
I don't remember exactly what I said because I think I'm still sleep deprived, but really the crux of it is that we want to make sure that that everyone has their own little walled garden that they can go and play in and do what they want to do. Whether they want to go build a sandcastle or pee on that sandcastle is totally their own. But at the end of the day, Jeff's putting himself in a position where they're becoming the operational point of contact for making sure that the service functions and doesn't function until we get to a point of finding a long-term owner for this. And this type of work doesn't fit with like Dave and the quote unquote actual SREs. And a lot of that and that tech support and recognizing just how much extra effort goes into running an environment like that doesn't necessarily fit with our IT ops as it sits today. So having to put expectations onto people who are using this tooling and deploying using our stuff need to know that this is entirely choose your own adventure. It's your castle to burn. We are not here to help you troubleshoot problems. We're not here to do anything. As long as our tooling is functioning correctly, you're here to do what you need to do as long as it's not production.
I genuinely agree with that. I was trying to add on to that, Paul. I think to try to guide that a little more, my feedback on that is like, part of what we're just trying to set up is the foundation. Like the folder structure and things itself there's not any tooling with that. Like once we get the mechanisms of how we want the folder structure and some of the security groups laid out for both AWS and GCP, hopefully those things are left more alone. I think with the Terraform tooling and other things after that, and then enforcing the label standards, I think maybe the other model where I was starting to try to say I was going is in other companies I've been at, it's a little hard because it's GitLab. They called it an inner source model of this, but we're open source. But it's like, this is the tool, we've helped create the baseline for it. Now everybody can contribute to it to help us manage our own resources better. So I think that would be the other model, maybe to keep, that concern of what you were addressing, Paul, for Jeff being the SRE for everybody for this, of like, no, we've created the tool, but now this is an open source tool the company can use to help maintain test infrastructure across AWS and GCP that is not production.
Yep.
Anybody can contribute to that tool. So I think that would be the fundamental guideline I would think we'd want to make sure we're sharing with everybody of it's created, but if you don't like the way a label gets applied or something in the Terraform, you can submit the MR to it and merge it.
Yeah, I think I completely support that as long as it's not manipulating how how our implementation in relation to our account on GCP is. As in, you can go make a Terraform change that has the ability to manipulate how the tool and the meta of the tool functions, but not how that tool interacts with our account, so that people couldn't submit an MR to allow them to go use
create a top of the organization level service account that can change anything. Yeah.
Exactly. Or if we put a restriction in that they can't go load GPUs into the whatever VM they're deciding to use, they don't have the ability to circumvent that by submitting an MR.
Yeah, but see, that's early optimization. At the moment, we don't have that guideline from the company. So I feel like right now we're just trying to implement the best practices of the obvious turn off the global service account in a project kind of thing for compromise, and make sure we enforce labels. Everybody should accept that. And if later on we have cost concerns where we don't want to enable GPU usage, we'll get there.
Yeah, no, I agree. And actually, I jump into this and later on is a lot of that is also to do with like the hard and soft security requirements we might have, so that we don't run into the problems that the red team has already picked off, like the ability to hop between projects.
Yeah.
And just how do we implement that through IAM? How do we enforce like hard firewall ruling, for example, and what stuff that we consider a little more ephemeral versus what stuff that we won't allow? And that's us setting policy on what we think a good test environment should be like.
Yeah.
And
again,
I think
if we set those standards. Sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
I was just going to support what Paul was saying. I was just going to +1 it, so go ahead.
Yeah, mine was basically a +1 with that extra detail of like, if we put in those firewall practices, then it at least allows us to also know when deviations happen.
Yeah.
So,
and I think a big piece of it as well builds upon, we were talking before of like, is it just a label or a tag? And I think we've all come to consensus, we're far past that. We are in the account or project isolation barrier. There's no way around that. And as you're reading and seeing more, well, I don't remember if it's Google or Amazon. I want to say it was Google that said, you guys are pretty sophisticated compared to the rest of the industry and what you're doing, but it looks like it's the best thing for what you're trying to do. So
that was Google, in terms of how we're trying to use GCP. But their advice to us did, I agree with you. That was the like creating a project per like team or something was probably your best isolation. So
and what I would like to do, and to the point of like not MR something to a Terraform module and have it affect global things, is end up with, I'm going to call it tiered terraforming for the sake of discussion, where basically you have your global Terraform, and that's both your configuration and your modules. And basically that's controlling the top level, the organizational unit type of stuff, to like, what are the realm configs, what are the realm management, where do secrets live for, that type of level. And that basically only the realm owners and designated security personnel, I have to say that the top 10 people, only they can actually touch that stuff. And then their second level down is, here's all the projects that get created. And most of that's going to be automated with some of the tooling we're going to build, right? Now that tooling is going to have access rights where only the administrators can actually hit the magic button to make that happen. But it is, again, a protected module library of Terraform or whatever other additional tooling we need for that. Then the third level down is what happens inside of it. And that's where, basically we automate the access request process, right? And so instead of having to do the, go into the UI, find the user, add a role, et cetera, we automate that through the Okta stuff we're building with the web UI stuff, the tooling I've been working on there. So it gets them into the right place. What they do inside of there, to Paul's point, is here's your sandbox, do what you will, is we then have a community library of Terraform modules that are, they're your GCP instances, they're your Omnibus instance, the different pieces that people would use for whatever their ephemeral infrastructure, even if it's long living infrastructure. But here's the baseline scaffolding of the best practice for a hardened environment or a hardened resource. And you basically manage your own Terraform state. We just give you a library of things, and that's where the community and it's open source, so anyone can come and do what they need to do, and it just affects that. And with the module and the MR is we do the same way that Dave, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding is that even for GitLab.com, we have a library of private Terraform modules that are all version controlled. Terraform supports versioning per module. And if you don't want something to break, you simply said I expect version 1.2.2, as what I'm trying to use, versus, hey, someone MR'd in and, oh, this is a breaking change, it's now 2.0.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, no, we have our own, there's the main Terraform
Yeah.
and then there's all the module repos.
Yeah.
And yeah, we pin versions at that point.
Exactly.
Right.
And
And
so
it's not perfect, but because even there, we're not perfect about making versions go across like staging then production because of how complex that can get. But yeah, it allows that isolation and pulling in of things.
Yeah. And I think the other thing it does as well is we can play with the idea of branching where you have an omnibus instance and you have a branch for this is more production like or this is very ephemeral like, and then versioning from there. But I don't want to get into the headaches of it right now. So just the concept of there's a community library of Terraform modules, and then people can use them or not use them or do whatever they will. But everything that manages everything up to the point of a GCP project or an AWS account and the IAM role for the user that gets into that account, we manage in the top 10 group, if you will, or whatever that the administrator group is. And then it's a separate infrastructure, separate architecture for what people do inside of there. Paul, does that align with your kind of security segregation?
Yep.
Okay. Davis, based on some of that, you look at it from the analytics side and the cost side. The labels and tags obviously would get applied at both a project level and a resource level, maybe a combination, maybe not, depending on testing. But any objections to that overall architecture?
No, I mean, I think the labels are the important thing there. Like part of me still thinks with like the project level stuff, like it could still be worthwhile to, like I understand the current setup, you create these walled environments and things like that, but I can see, if someone wants to use a service that's not included in Terraform or something, like it could be useful to have a way for the tool to like spin up in a different project also, if that's possible. And then they can like provision like other resources outside of Terraform potentially, like in their team projects.
Yeah, I mean, they get GCP console access. We just use Terraform to give them an easy button version.
Yeah, the basic app and stuff gives them their own project Davis, but at that point, they're owners of their project in GCP. So if they want to spin up their own VM by hand instead of using Terraform, there's no reason they couldn't.
Yeah.
And that's the part of the problem that I was trying to adjust by what I was saying, like when we give everybody that control, what it gets us out of the pattern of right now is we occasionally get these access requests for I need a service account in GitLab internal. Hey, infra, can you go make it? Or something else, or some other project like that. Or we get, recently dealt with the question from the distribution team. The distribution team needed a new project, needed to make a service account on that project. And until we gave them, their dev manager now has folder IAM on their folder so they can go do that stuff, like it just eliminates the need for the access request altogether. What Jeff's got in place on top of that is Okta will make that just possible without me. Right now, I had to go by hand, assign the dev manager to their folder as the folder IAM, and then there's a little bit of work to do that by hand right now. We automate even that away. But inside of that, then they can make their own project. They can assign service accounts to it and other things. The Terraform, as Jeff mentioned, gives them the easy button. So at least if they did something by hand, that still gives the risk of they could compromise their whole project by creating a service account that's too broad. The easy button at least conforms a little bit of labeling and security to make it easy for people who are like, I just need a project that I can spin up a GitLab instance in or something.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. My concern is mainly around like if they couldn't do that, like they would probably just go outside the system to like spin those things up, and it would be like the same.
This Terraform is largely again like kind of a rewrite of the group projects in some ways, stuff that we had, which is like here's an easy button with Terraform to make me a project where I can go do what I need to do in that after there, or those after and in or backwards, but
it's kind of it. I have to say is it's going in the GCP console's power user mode. Like Terraform, we give them all the tutorial stuff like, hey, give me the 10-step tutorial to get an omnibus instance running with 3 runners, right? We have that. So Terraform is optional. It is simply the tooling that we have chosen to give people the express or easy button version to do what they need to do. But if you want to do it manually, go to town. Here's SSH, here's Google Console, here's AWS Console. Have at it. Here's your project, and your user account can only go into projects that we've granted you IAM rights through with our automated tooling at the top level, right? And that what that really does is that whole service account in GitLab internal or whatever that, because let's face it, most of our engineers need administrator level access to do some of the cloud infrastructure things that we're doing. And that's where this just limits that blast radius, so they're not exposing everything everywhere. They're only affecting them, right? And the only thing that Terraform, if people have opposition to using it, that's fine. We already saw some of that opposition from the support team on the original issue for the sandbox. Is we're not going to force it upon them, but a lot of people who deal with infrastructure regular basis find the efficiency gains with the Terraform usage because they don't spend a week setting their stuff up. They set up 10 minutes because they've already templatized it. And they'll have to spin it up, spin it down, whatever, it's Terraform apply and destroy. So we're simply, for those who have matured their own development test cycle into using infrastructure, as they go on that journey, they discover some of these toolings the same way back in the 90s, always discovered bash scripts. It's the same concept. So yeah, we're not forcing it upon them. We're simply using Terraform as our top level. And then, what they do inside their box is up to them. And we simply write a community that everyone can share the same library, or they can go out and use the Terraform registry publicly, or any Docker images, or whatever they choose to do is up to them. So
within reason.
Yeah, I mean, and that's for security to enforce at whatever level they choose. Yeah. Amber, circling back for you, a lot of this automates the access request process. I know that most things today are, they're mostly manually performed. They mostly come through GitLab issues. We can automate a lot of this with kind of the database, the web application side of it, and the Okta, and the audit log, et cetera. Do you have any, I guess what I'm looking for is things like audit logging concerns, oversights, approval buttons, things of that nature, because ultimately what I'd like to get it down to is, especially within the engineering organization, we have 500 and some odd people total across all of that piece of it. Do you have any problem with people managers approving their own team members requests? If we put that in the web UI, does IT ops need to have, they can have eyes on it from an audit log perspective, but do you need to have day-to-day eyes on approvals for those sort of things? Or if we automate it, you're fine with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as there's a way to audit it, letting the people manager ultimately approve it is the best route to go. One, IT doesn't want to be a backlog for anyone. We want, things to work as smoothly as possible. But two, even with our ARs now, essentially the people manager is approving it. Like, I don't know if someone should have access or not most of the time. Based on their job, there's 1,300 people in this company, and I don't know everyone's job or role and what they need to access for that role. So I rely on the manager to be like, yes, this person needs it. And then I just go ahead and provision it. So that's essentially what I'm doing now. It's just I'm the gatekeeper because they can't provision it themselves. So.
Do you have any other, or Paul, go ahead on that.
So at some point, we're going to need to reevaluate that based upon like some of the security rules we're going to be putting in for this environment will be dependent on what org they're in, whether they're sitting in product versus engineering versus finance, will very much it'll change what their security profile is going to be to allow them to do certain things and act in a certain way in this tool, and more than likely in other areas of GitLab as well. And at some point, I would expect IT is also going to need to start to consider whether this person is like part of development to get access to some tooling or get licensing for some software versus someone who's sitting in sales. Or is the idea that IT is just going to try to just leave it entirely up to management, assuming that management knows what's best for their employees?
That is essentially how we've been handling access requests now. It's definitely worth something like to think about in this scope as well. I'd probably have to talk to Peter about it ultimately.
I have a one-on-one with Peter tomorrow. I have a couple of similar topics to go over about this. And so I'll include that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, at this point, because we've been so understaffed in our department, we've kind of been relying on the people managers to like make those decisions, because I can't sit there and research every single person and their role and then sit there and think about, well, do they need access for this? And like, I mean, it takes enough time to provision these things as it is, without me having to look up every single person in the company. So I would hope that the manager would know and not just blindly be like, yeah, sure, let's smash some buttons and give this person access. But
Yeah.
you know, that's not how things usually work out. So.
And Paul, one of the things I'm working on, we had discussed some of the back end, the database model side I'm working on with, how we're going to provision this. As I do have the authentication roles, and I am already inheriting the Okta divisions, departments, and groups, is we can do the security group mapping to it. So for example, if that web UI says, hey, so Jonathan's my manager, right? It says, Jeff is requesting access to the sales CS, solution architect account. Is this approved, yes or no? And there is a profile security group already set up for this group. Members are automatically added to solution architect security group with all the permissions that we define at an infrastructure management level. And that way, because each of our infrastructure realms, each of our infrastructure groups, we then say, okay, which roles are allowed to access this and which ones are, members effectively. So what is the member, what can members do in each group? Or we can roll that up to the department under engineering. What can members do under any group in engineering versus sales, et cetera. So we can do a lot of that automatic role mapping. There might be an initial work to, identify what those are, or, to Dave's point of iteration of, we're not going to get into some of the deeper weeds right now, but we can say that, sales in general should not be doing service accounts for stuff unless it's a solution architect in a sandbox doing something for this piece, right? So we can work on some of those refinements, but the tooling I'm building does have that automation level built in based on the Okta variables that we're already receiving from Bamboo HR's automatic mapping. So we can alleviate some of the burden with that.
Cool. Oh, I like it.
Good deal there. James, I know you're in the car. I want to give you a chance if there's anything you want to add based on current discussion.
No, I don't really have anything to add. This sounds extremely promising, and no, it sounds perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Good deal. So Dave, I want to circle on to the, what we're not solving, and obviously there's a production elements and a couple other things, and Davis, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this as well. My ultimate goal is simply for production stuff is make sure you guys are happy, or you folks are happy, and then whatever labels and tags, if it's something eventually, it could be a slow migration or phased migration, to being able to use them so that Davis's reports and Brooks's reports, show a consistent thing. You're not having to do different things based on different labels being used. Based on what you've seen the evolution of over the last month or two, do you see major concerns? I mean, I don't want to dictate what happens inside of your realm, but do you see major concerns with the approach we're taking or any of the global standards, if you will, that we're setting?
No, I just think there might be a gap in between how we handle underneath the GitLab SaaS projects applying the labeling. It's going to have to be separate, obviously, than all the Terraform you're doing. But I feel like as long as we're taking that approach, I don't see problems with the standards. We just may have feedback once we start to try to apply the labels. And I think, the only other thing after that would be a concern that we'll just make sure we're care of is, again, just the isolation of anything that's underneath the infrastructure folder as it's currently named now. It just doesn't get touched by this automation since we have our own Terraform and other things already. Yeah. And that applied to the Okta side of things too. Like for me, I saw your section down below. What are we doing? Like the thing I want to untangle ultimately is actually the permissions in the org too, of making sure Okta has the right control in certain places. But again, in that case, under the infrastructure folder, there's a pretty good spider web of who has control of what that we're going to have to untangle manually. So okay. I like the idea of whatever Okta is going to do for everybody, but again, it might have to be outside of the infrastructure folder.
Totally fine. Yeah. And that's where I think the realms are going to be separate. So each realm is going to adopt
So
the automation.
Thank you for using the right word, and correcting me. But so what I'm thinking of is like the infrastructure realm may have to be separate for a bit until we get some other baseline things laid out. But
totally fine.
I'm still interested on that. But I see that like that's the main thing for us. I think in the first step to try to help with what Davis is looking for is actually just doing the labeling, and that's all very meta. So I'm not too concerned about the impact there. But like I said, the area of concern I do have is just in the IAM aspect of that and making sure that our automation doesn't by accident go wild and touch things outside of the realm that was intended to. So, but that's in the design. So as long as we're cut for lower, I think we're good.
Paul, did you have something to add? I think you were.
Yeah, I was. We were talking about production, and like you were just mentioning, like the impact to potentially infrastructure space, and ownership. That this is more of a conversation that I'm going to take away with Dave for our Wednesday meeting. But at some point, a lot of the stuff gets promoted to become like there's a lot of things that are going to become production tooling or production service or production something that isn't necessarily GitLab.com. And that promotion process is going to need to figure that out, and also need to figure out like ownership. This is totally meta, long game scenario for this, but this is a conversation that I'm already dealing with security automation, for example, where 90% of what security automation is going to be doing is going to be more than happy to sit in this demo systems work, but that 10% of work they've already tried to prime the pump. And Dave, from what I understand, they've managed to convince you to add a sub project for security automation to place that there. Figuring out what that long game is going to be is something that we want to add to the roadmap at some point.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if I have the right context on the security automation thing, so we'll just catch up on that.
Yeah, we'll talk on Wednesday.
I think the other thing I'd add to give you the specifics on that, Paul, as an example, is Lean and the People Ops team, where she created the nominator bot. And the nominator bot was something where People Ops originally came to us and said, hey, we need a project in GCP where we would see this tooling creating something like that. But the nominator bot was something that at first they were testing and is now a production for the company thing. So I would hold that. If you're looking for an example of what Paul was talking about, it would be that kind of thing where People Ops was like, we need a project to test something. Now we need like the long-term place for this. Is there some sort of process on how those teams in their projects with what we're created, like have the right structure? However, like my side point on that though is still wanting us to continue to iterate. Like let's move forward with what we've got, and make sure that we've got. I feel like we've got a framework that's flexible enough to adapt to that.
And you're building on something that was actually my next meta level question. And this is part of the iteration, like the fork in the road. We can go left or right now on this next question. The engineering dev or eng dev realm naming convention that we've come up with right now is designed for teams to do what they want inside of it and simply give them that space. Do we need to split that into eng dev, sandbox and eng dev production?
I would basically say no.
Okay.
Everything, because of the way GitLab operates and everybody putting things into the product, GitLab.com and the GitLab product itself are the production as it was.
Fair
so
enough.
I think the problem we try to solve that we know we have right now is the eng dev sandbox.
Okay. So what if we just say classify then as eng dev is test, sandbox, everything non-prod?
Yes.
If it's a tooling for your team that's long living, that's still not prod, and as far as the definition of this, it's still internal to GitLab, right?
Yeah. This bears to mind like just needing to understand putting a definition around what's truly production, because similar to the conversation we're having about you potentially turning into an SRE, is having expectations. Because the last thing I want is, one, I don't want you to become responsible for some randos team thinking their tool is now sitting in prod that is sitting in demo systems. And the second one is, I don't want Dave and the infra SREs taking responsibility for some rando tool that someone considers prod.
Or security, the CERT team coming in, finding out that this had production data.
Yes.
Right.
Because yeah, so I think that, you know, and that might be just clearly stating in the working group, Jeff, that there is no SLA on this stuff.
Yeah.
You are responsible for your SLA. Like
Yeah.
there is no team enforcing, making sure this stuff is available. So,
And no red
I
data.
think if we're stating some things that way, that will hopefully make some of that clear.
I think one of the things we may want to consider in a future iteration, you know, right now we have a trusted working group here, is basically a security awareness training for infrastructure production type of, you know, owners. So you want to be a system owner of Rando Tool X, right? Here's the training you need to go to and get certified that you're now managing this. You have your own SLA, you have, here's the support, here's the security QBRs you need to do, blah, blah, blah. Kind of, Paul, similar to what I did with the demo systems when I first spun it up, right? Like, let's go meet everybody. Here's what we got. Get it all, you know, everybody signing off on what's going on. So we may want to consider that for the future.
The terms and conditions of using the demo systems.
Right. You know.
You agree to monitoring? We're going to have
Right.
We will find you.
I did put a placeholder in the naming convention in that I called shared services. That may be an interim solution for this right now. You know, we have it kind of with the, you know, under the Eng infrastructure realm, right? There's the, you know, shared infra, and then there's the shared services group. That may be a good place. And what we may want to find out is, do we need to do that under engineering development as well?
Yeah.
But it would be, I don't want any red data under development.
Correct. Yeah, no, and I think that's what I think it's good enough for us in the charter to say there's no SLA. This is not expected to house any red data.
Right.
Move and iterate from there. But again, I think the biggest two problems we're trying to unblock are the Eng dev and the demo systems. That, you know, the demo systems is originally the thing you're trying to adjust, and those are the two things we need to iterate on first and fastest.
Yeah. Yeah. So we can go down that road. And Amber, I think this is where, from the business ops side, this is going to show up eventually, is what is it that business ops owns from an infrastructure perspective, if it's serving the entire company, or does the, you know, theoretical infrastructure team get formed underneath of business ops, right? And that's a future problem for a future day. I'm just calling it out as an eventuality, but I thought you should be aware that's a possibility. It wouldn't probably fall on your shoulders, but right now you're the only one who we can talk to about it. So I figured let you share your thoughts if you have any.
I will throw this out there that with one of my coworkers leaving a few weeks ago, we're not exactly backfilling his position for another systems administrator. We're actually going to be hiring for a systems engineer. And that might be something, I know they're writing up the job family now to get it approved, but that's going to be more, obviously, engineering heavy person who can handle stuff like infrastructure and things like that. So I'm not sure if that will be on their plate, but I think that is something that Peter is kind of looking to put on this new person when they come on as the new systems engineer.
Yeah, and eventually we can iterate that toward, you know, global coverage, because that's the big thing, right? Is, you know, what does our on-call thing come in? Because like for demo systems, I mean, we have America and Europe coverage. We don't have Asia coverage, right? Yeah. And, you know, one of the things that we should probably do, and Paul, this is something just to noodle on a little bit, is at what point from like a security incident response perspective, right now we have certain engineers on call. Unfortunately, their shifts are very long, and it's very much, you're still getting woken up. It's not regional coverage, right? You're not staffed for that.
Yeah.
But at what point does, Dave, this kind of applies on the SRE side as well, where is a shared SRE escalation path that is regional? We're not waking someone up, where they could go into an infrastructure owner's playbook of sorts and says, hey, your system's a problem. Here's my 10 steps in order to remediate common problem. Or, you know, I run into this with Azure all the time, is, you know, Chris Moberly runs some script, you know, and then it pounds my system. They find a vulnerability and they shut it off while I'm asleep, right? Or whatever's going on. We need some sort of, how do we span the on-call response into this for infrastructure that doesn't have an on-call person?
Yeah.
So even if it's your sandbox, your SLA, we still need to understand it from we still have to push the big red button. And I think we should have global coverage of big red buttons.
I am on the fence on agreeing and disagreeing because one, this is test demo destructible environments that have no SLA and no expectations of maintaining service.
Fair.
And we are setting the T's and C's very early on, as we've already discussed about what those expectations are. And if we put like good security measures in place, we're talking about these walled gardens, this would imply ingress and egress rules. This would then imply that Chris Moberly's scripts can't actually go and smash what's sitting in that environment because that base configuration shouldn't allow for that. If someone has gone in and made the exception to go and actually extend their ingress and egress rules, they've accepted the fact that if they leave something that is just flapping out there in the wind and we find it, we're going to turn it off.
Yeah.
And anyone who's sitting in a production state here is going to say, tough.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's for the on-call on that, Jeff, that's where it seems like the existing either SRE or CERT on-call, like if we get notified about an issue, that's where there will be some structure that we'll decide on permissions for that, but that's where there will be some structure of how much of the CERT team and how much of the infra team can still see the whole organization in GitLab. But like from my point of view, that boiled down to what I'm still trying to fix is that right now we have people in security groups at the true top of the GitLab organization who have owner level access across the whole organization. That we want to push down to folders. So what I would do and picture that is that, like trying to dive deep on that security for a second, is that the CERT team still is probably going to have folder level owner on every folder, but there's only going to be a limited number of true admins at the top of the organization. That's going to be a select set of management, so that like those for not that way we just disallow who can create folders, create projects tied to the top of the organization and do associations on billing accounts. That's where we do need to create some limits. Or separation. Like, you know, in the case of the people ops team folder, there may be a tighter restriction on who truly has view into that. Like right now, there's a big subset of infrastructure and CERT that can see the people ops folder. In the future, that probably should just be CERT.
Yeah, and well, even then, this really comes down to the idea of just least privileged, following to provide as little access as absolutely needed.
Correct, and that's where we're violating least privilege at the moment in the organization because we have like 40 individual contributors and people that have high level permissions at the top of the org.
Yeah.
So nonetheless, like trying to go back to your on-call question, like right now I kind of feel like between like what Paul said, there's the T's and C's and what we've said for SLA on this thing. If we have incidents, then the existing CERT team in particular response pattern will deal with we need to go turn this off. We'll go do that. Well,
the other piece of it is that unlike GitLab internal, for example, today, where you can easily hop around to anyone else's terrible cesspool of a box, these can all be in disparate projects where they don't have the ability to spread like the plague. And so the surface area of attack is substantially lower. And so if a box under Amber's random account happens to have like open reg for their GitLab.com instance, we largely won't care because it's just that one box that'll get hit. And a large piece of this is just reminding people not to use like production credentials so that one box isn't hopping over to a deploy token onto GitLab.com, because that's just ends up in a bad time. And a good chunk of this is all going to be human error solution. And on a lot of the tooling that we're going to be implementing here is trying to eliminate the squishy human problems as much as possible.
That makes sense, and I think the CERT on call does address my original thing, and we can also use it where the temporary access type of deal with the infrastructure is these CERT team has group permissions into all the different areas, right, type of thing, or it's granted and ungranted automatically based on the CERT on call rotation schedule or whatever the pieces are, and then infrastructure is. Dave, as the infrastructure manager, you can then authorize someone to go in and their access expires in 48 hours or whatever. Right? We can play those games.
Or what kind of tools in Okta do we have? Just temporarily, add, remove
Yeah.
that group, things like that.
Yeah. So we can play those games in upcoming iterations, but I think right now is, you know, CERT would be responsible for big red buttons of things that are dangerous right now. And everything else is test dev, it's non-prod. If you did prod and test dev, that's your own fault.
Yeah.
And leave it at that. And then we can cross the bridge of where does prod services live with a future iteration. But to your point, I don't think we need to change too much of this because we don't have an infrastructure team dedicated to production services outside of GitLab.com. Other than, you know, what PeopleOps runs right now, right? But most of their stuff is SaaS services anyway. So
Well, and IT Ops maintaining Okta, for example, and
right.
The other services that we use.
Right. Yeah, but I'm just looking more from the, you know, the tier 4 Linux engineer who can go in and really, you know, triage, right? So okay, that makes good sense. I think that addresses it. Davis, anything that any flags that throws for you, or just that sounds good?
Yeah, no flags. Yeah, I think for the labels and everything, like the important thing for us is just aligning what we're labeling these demo environments with what we're planning on labeling, like the production and all the other environments. I like the basic for all the basic and most important labels. So I think that's really just the most important thing. And I think just as a comment, I think like the realm labels that we've been talking about, and maybe also team labels, like those will probably be the most, like we'll probably iterate on those the most, I would assume, because I think those aren't like well defined within the business itself. So I would imagine like those will probably be the areas where you have to iterate the most on like what those actually look like.
Yeah. Okay. Amber, any other thoughts from your end on this?
No, not right now.
Okay. Easy enough.
I actually need to drop. I got to go manage some lunch things for kids at school. So.
Well, have fun with that. Thank you for everything and all the contributions.
If there's any things that you need me to help answer, just drop me a mention in that document, and I'm happy to keep meeting a little more frequently if you need to, or something else too.
Okay. I throw this for a 2 weekly by sync or bi-weekly sync on it, but I think a lot of stuff will just happen in the channel. This is just more to baseline everyone on the same page. But feel free to drop, Dave. Thank you so much.
Thanks. See ya.
Paul, is there anything you wanted to recap, just kind of moving down the sections? I think Davis's point on what are realms, we can circle back on because I think there is some iteration there, but I think we need to figure out like who's doing what. We don't know that. We probably won't know it for another month or so until we get some of the tooling in place. But,
no, we covered everything that I wanted to run over here today, and I think we've done pretty good. And really, the last thing is really just going into the meta about how we're going to be doing IAM and how we're going to make sure that a lot of the integration with following like the Okta to GCP translation for good IAM is really the piece, and making sure things like the service account mess doesn't take place. And how do we then relate that stuff to the security policies we want to implement and stuff? So what I'm going to be doing in this is, from what it sounds like, is ours going to be like trying to figure out what our security policy is going to be and helping with setting expectations on this. And I just want to make sure that I know the right flow to help prepare you for that information when it comes time to need it.
Okay. Yeah, and we can work more in our one-on-one syncs on the details of that, but
cool.
Totally in agreement there. That is really all that I have at this point. I do have a handbook MR I'm going to tag everyone here for approval on before it makes its way up the executive food chain, because right now Sid is the namespace owner in the handbook for this, and so he's going to end up seeing it. I want to get all of our stamps of approval on it before it makes it to him. Yeah, at this point, and Davis, I did refactor it based on your feedback on all the different group pages. I moved that out up to just the realm level. So we can get that as first iteration, then we can add upon it as needed. And then my hope is over the next 2 to 3 weeks is get all the the web portal type of data, the Okta translation into the account provisioning in Terraform. I'm going to build that middleware application, get that all up and running with the first iteration, and then basically start a proof of concept with a couple of the groups that are in there. One of them was tagged in the issue for the quality group is trying to do some testing. They just want an account to do it in. I'll do it with obviously the professional services team. It's a great place to do it in. And then I'm going to do the sandbox testing with the customer success team for all of their clusters and moving some of those over. So the goal is by the end of September, we've done a beta or an alpha or a beta, whatever we end up calling it, across multiple departments to see what works and what doesn't, and then start bringing all the other team owners into the conversation of, okay, we've got this, we'd like you to start kicking the tires on this. And basically, I'd like to get a consensus in the October timeframe of, yes, it's working for us. Yes, we're adopting this. Here's our timeline. Great. Or we have some limitations and it's more than 10 or 20%. There's some serious limitations. We can know what those are and prioritize those iterations as needed. So that's my hope, is kind of taking us through the flows to build the tooling and getting people on board. But yeah, that's where I stand with it. Then I'll create a working group page just so it's documented in the handbook for preservation's sake. But otherwise, let's post stuff in the channel as we need to. Paul, any of your thoughts on your end for that?
No, I have. I'm content with where we're going here. Obviously, I will make my opinions known as necessary.
Good deal. Amber, closing thoughts.
I'm excited to move forward.
Cool. Davis?
No, I think I'm good for now. But yeah, I'm excited to get some standard labels and all that going.
Okay. James, any last words?
No, that sounds perfect. I'm excited. I mean, it's good to hear everybody working together, so it's looking promising.
Cool. Thank you. All right, well, I wish everyone a great day, and I'm going to go through and transpose our call. I didn't take too many notes during it, but I'll transpose the discussion topics into the doc so it's there, and we'll go from there. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your Thursday.
Cool.
Hey,
Thanks,
you all.
everybody.
Cheers.
See you.